Psych ward, my experience with the spirit of suicide. Many are familiar with the topic of suicide and psych wards. I decided to connect them because often those who attempt suicide end up in psych wards. There is good and bad in everything, including doctors, pastors, police officers, and nurses. Just as witches and warlocks hide in churches to cover their dark assignments, they also have regular jobs to disguise themselves. I want to share my experiences to illustrate when I started to see into the spirit heavily and the events that followed. As a child, I could see the hidden realm, but not as frequently as today. I remember being aware even in the womb, seeing the light as I was born. This memory confirmed my spiritual awareness from an early age, indicating I was gifted. This memory, along with many others, is what helped me remain sane throughout a lot of the attacks I will speak about later. Throughout my life, I remembered specific events that played out. For example, as a baby, I was fascinated by a picture on the wall that turned into a dark deity, making me cry. When I was 3 years old, I saw the spirit of a Caucasian man in a scuba diving suit in my backyard in Jamaica, which was full of bushes and trees, but no water. He threatened me, saying, "If you don't leave, I will kill you." I turned and ran, and as I looked back, he vanished. At 4, on a plane to Canada, I had my first encounter with an angel. She waved at me from between the clouds, but no one else saw her. I rediscovered my gifts as an adult around the same time I reconnected with my kingdom husband, after not seeing him since childhood. We spoke a few times before falling out, but he reawakened something in me. I began to feel purposeful and sought a closer relationship with God. This rekindled my faith, and I started dreaming and having visions again. I was rediscovering my gifts. As I embraced my gifts, my mind cleared and my vocabulary improved. It was like the movie Limitless, but instead of a pill like in the movie, God's influence enhanced my memory and spiritual access. People opened up to me about things they hadn't shared before. I received a lot of attention. People said I had an unexplainable glow and looked different in a good way. I was invited on many dates, but I was too shy and turned them down due to the confusion about my connection with Lion. Animals and children were especially drawn to me. Children smiled and babies stopped crying as I walked by. I then started seeing repeated numbers, especially 333. My dreams were vivid, clear, and even prophetic. I started seeing visions while awake and while my eyes were closed. People who cared for me offered opportunities for a new job and lifestyle so I could quit my current job, but I was stubborn and didn't want to depend on others. Although I felt some anxiety while rediscovering my gifts and experiencing new ones, I was mostly anxiety-free. I felt alive, happy, and at peace. However, my kingdom husband stayed on my mind daily, even though the dreams about him were no longer pleasant. It became so annoying that I had to drink away thoughts of him because I missed him. The heartbreak from our falling out and the yearning for his spirit made me seek God more than ever. Despite feeling better and more confident, I still needed to numb the sadness of yearning for him. I couldn't understand the strong connection and why I couldn't release him. I begged God to release him from me. However, I saw and heard his name everywhere. And we often ended up in the same places without realizing it. He would spot me as he was driving away, or I would spot him in his truck as I drove by in a cab. The city is so big, so this was rare. There was a familiarity to his spirit that felt like I had known him before. At this time, I didn't know he was from my past. Music no longer sounded the same because every romance song felt like it was about us, giving me an out-of-body experience in random places like grocery stores, causing me to run out in panic. I was always reminded of the dreams and visions about our future together. My dreams included listening to and sharing ideas about music together. I also had the gift of making music, and God gave me new music that wasn't out yet, indicating that I should take music seriously. Although these dreams replayed in my memory, they didn't help me release him or heal from being away from him. His presence wouldn't leave my spirit, and sometimes it made me feel crazy, but I knew I wasn't because I had tried to release him many times. I begged God daily to make his presence leave me, but it didn't. So I knew God must have something to do with it. My sensitivity to my gifts felt so amazing. I felt the wind every time it brushed my face, and I loved the enhanced sight and smell of nature. The gifts started to get so much more powerful that my senses and hearing tuned to another level. I was hearing sounds that the human brain would not hear. I was starting to think of certain things that would happen shortly after. I could hear conversations happening far away. It was like a whole new world opened up. At first, I ignored them so I didn't feel crazy. It got so intense that there were times I would run out of stores after hearing certain songs because my heart would beat uncontrollably and I would start to sweat due to nervousness. This is what love was supposed to feel like, far more intense than anything I had ever experienced. Although these gifts were amazing, still anything associated with my kingdom husband would bring me crazy, uneasy anxiety or trigger me. It was hard to understand as I loved him deeply. I remember one day I walked by his office on my way to the grocery store and I felt nauseous. The anxiety was so bad I walked back home and ordered food instead. But the beautifulness of the connection started to take a toll on me. It was as if someone found out about the connection and did things to mess with it. It was as if a dark spell was put on me when it came to him. However, although the connection was being tampered with at the time without knowing the details, I would still get so many positive confirmations in the spirit and dreams about him that confirmed he was my husband. What I didn't understand is how a man who helped me go from being numb in the heart to madly in love and getting close to God could also bring me so much emotional pain without being around him. I would find out years later that this was indeed a separation spell. As I continued to learn and acknowledge my gifts, I noticed I had a lot of energy, making me look hyper, but it was controllable. I started going back to everything I loved, like singing, dancing, drawing, painting, and writing, back in my Disney princess era, which I haven't been in for a long time. I also began eating clean and unintentionally started juice fasting, as my body was rejecting everything except juiced fruits and veggies. I lost weight, became toned without working out, and my skin had a new glow. I wondered if this was what I had been running from all these years. I felt like a superhero, realizing I was different from many people. Although I didn't know my path or purpose, I knew I was gifted and I had access to the spiritual realm. However, things started to get strange months later. One day I received a phone call from my mom, who I hadn't spoken to in over a year. I didn't know then that she was involved in the attacks and monitoring me. She asked me many questions about my life, which I answered. I felt innocent at the time because I was still on a spiritual high of happiness, despite the heartbreak from not speaking to Lion. I wasn't discerning well and saw everything through rose-colored glasses. Then she told me to call my aunt, my dad's sister, after our conversation, which I did. My aunt was surprised by my vocabulary and wisdom in our conversation. I opened up to her about my spiritual gifts, and she showed great interest. After these calls, I didn't hear back from them. Looking back, I noticed everyone involved in monitoring me contacted me around the same time. My mom, some of my aunts, and even the Dungeon Bell Witch. I will explain who she is later, who texted me from random numbers pretending to be my Lion, all reached out. It was strange that my mom called after a year of no contact, just to ask about my life, and then told me to call my aunt. They both watched my Facebook post, which had changed significantly since accessing my spiritual gifts. My posts were now positive, knowledgeable, and centered around spirituality and God, gaining me around 4,000 friends in 6 months. A few months later, after vodka to numb the heartbreak from Lion, I texted my mom to open up about him. A big mistake. I forgot about the dream where she was spying on me because I didn't interpret or discern what it meant back then. I didn't mention his name, but talked about the connection I had with him and how he changed my life by helping me open my heart again. It was crazy that I sought her advice despite the trauma she caused me as a child. In the past, she had spoken badly about me to my ex-boyfriend and ex-husband, and even told them to leave me. Yet for some reason, this didn't matter when I spoke to her because I felt this call was a sign she might have changed or cared. I genuinely tried to build a relationship with her again. A few months later, she called me and started asking about my life again. After discussing everything going on, she mentioned to me that her friend's daughter committed suicide by jumping off the balcony in Vancouver. She told me that I should open a life insurance will for my children and put her on it just in case anything happens to me. I found it very strange that she called me to tell me this. However, I didn't think anything of it because I still had rose-colored glasses on. Weeks after the new year, I started to notice that my calls were being monitored. I also noticed that I was being tracked and followed because random text messages would come in saying exactly where I was. Random text messages would come in saying unsettling things like, "I have eyes on you." This went on for about 2 months, and I did my best to ignore it. One night, as I fell asleep, I heard extremely loud moaning sounds. I heard the bed from the condo unit above mine scraping and banging on the floor. I opened my eyes and could tell the person who lived above me was in a bedroom because their unit had the same layout as my unit. The moaning woman seemed to want everyone to hear because it seemed forced. I had never experienced this before and had been in the condo for a year. I knew the moaning was intentional, and what was strange was I could feel the intercourse in my spirit. I didn't understand this because it felt like I was the one having sex. I immediately turned on some music and went to sleep. Weeks later, the strangeness continued. On one occasion, I had just got my hair done. It was big and curly. I had even bought myself a new Macaj designer jacket since it was All-Star Weekend downtown. I wanted to go out but didn't have a babysitter, and my regular babysitter wasn't available. I couldn't think of anyone to call, and then I decided to call my mom. I know what you're thinking, but remember at the time, I still didn't know. She agreed to babysit. When I dropped off the children, I was smiling, happy, and full of energy. Although we didn't talk a lot and had our differences in the past, I greeted her with a smile and all the love. I then noticed she was eyeing me up and down with a disgusted look that she tried to clean up with a fake smile afterwards. I tried to ignore her, and then I noticed her look at my jacket with disgust. She then asked how much it was as she forced a smirk. I said $750. She said, "Oh, I would never spend so much money on a jacket like that." She started talking about the type of jacket she liked and what she would buy with that amount of money. This brought back childhood memories, but I kept telling myself to ignore her. When she looked at my hair and asked when I had got it done, I said yesterday. She replied, "I don't like it. It's not my style." I tried to explain why it looked different, but my confidence dropped. As I was leaving, my teenage brother complimented me, which brought my confidence back. A few days later, I picked up my children while she was at work and decided not to call her again because my spirit felt uneasy. Weeks later, I felt a dark feeling in my spirit, like I was going to die. My gifts, which were once enjoyable, now caused anxiety, depression, stress, and headaches. The feeling became worse ever since I let my mom watch my children. I looked at my children and felt an urgent need to send them to their dad, my ex-husband in the USA, because I sensed something bad was going to happen to me. My oldest son, Malachi, who has autism, had a support worker who said he wasn't getting priority for therapy because he wasn't in a support home. As a single mom, I was on a wait list for special needs support, which would take years. I decided that the best thing for my oldest was for him to stay in a support family home to get bumped to priority on the wait list. Therefore, he could get the necessary therapy while my other 2 children went to their dad in the U.S. I called their dad and said, "I feel like something bad is going to happen to me. I can't put my finger on it, but God is warning me of something. I need to send them to you for safety." I didn't know at the time, but this was the gift of discernment. He agreed, and soon after, they were on their way to their dad's. I went through a heavy depression for a few weeks. I researched ways to heal online and discovered a nearby store that sold candles, crystals, cards, etc. I decided to take a trip there. I saw a pack of angelic oracle cards that got my attention. I didn't think it was a bad thing at the time because I desperately needed encouragement. When I got home, I opened the box and started pulling cards with messages like opportunity, your healing, believe in your dreams, etc. I pulled cards daily, but eventually stopped because they weren't helpful, serving as a Band-Aid instead. A few months later, I was at work and I received a text message from a burner phone, fake number. It was from the same number that texted me when my mom reached out after not speaking for a year. This was Dungeon Bell Witch, but I didn't know who she was back then. The person was pretending to be Lion. I could tell the person was monitoring me and had been for a while. They asked me random questions. Some of the questions sounded like something Lion would ask. At first, I thought it was him. However, I noticed discrepancies in the way they texted. They knew quite a bit about him, and it was if they'd spoken to Lion or accessed information in the spiritual realm. They mentioned some things that only I would know that Lion didn't even know. They also asked me specific types of questions, as if they were testing me and trying to frame me to make it seem like I was a gold digger. I knew that whoever it was trying to gather negative information about me in order to tarnish my character. The imposter asked me if I wanted to have nice things, and that we could both team up as a duo and milk some men for money. They asked me why I didn't want to be with a man only for money, and why I wanted love instead of money, etc. She eventually blew her cover as Dungeon Bell Witch, which at the time I didn't know who she was. I just knew it was a female, and she knew Lion. She was trying to get me to side with her. She then ended the conversation by saying, "Have a nice life, Peaches." I knew that she was close to Lion. However, I didn't know how close. I found out later that she was also monitoring me by going to psychics and asking them about me. She then started to copy my taste, look, and style in hopes of doing a destiny swap. I also found out later from God that she was involved in witchcraft, attacking me and using spells on Lion. I will explain all this later. A month later, I received a text from a different fake phone number. This person was warning me that there was someone coming after my soul and that I was going to need to fight. I didn't think much about it, but I knew that it aligned with the uneasy feeling I felt as if death was near. A few days later after this text, I started having nightmares about Lion. The heavy nightmare dreams started to come in after I started connecting the dots that there were 3 bad women after him. In some of the negative dreams, I started to see the 3 witches in my family, my mom, Aunt Avery, Mom's sister, the witches in Jamaica, and Lion's exes working together. The dreams started to repeat, showing me that they were doing witchcraft to keep us apart. In one dream, I saw him sleeping wrapped in his duvet. When I tried to run to his bed to warn him, my Aunt Avery grabbed me and held me hostage. This is the same aunt who once told me in the past that God showed her my marriage. I couldn't speak when I woke up and felt a spirit holding me down until I thought, "Jesus," and the spirit released me. That same month, I received a revelation from God about Lion. God told me I needed to get my life in order and love myself to be ready for marriage and a relationship. At the time, I had 2 phones, one for work and one for personal calls. I decided, I am done with this job. I'm going to go back to school and change my life. I felt this was from God. What I didn't realize was that I was under attack. I was receiving truthful messages in the spirit, but later, manipulated messages made it hard to discern properly. I felt off and decided to get rid of my work phone. Initially, I reset it, but then a manipulating spirit told me to throw the phone off the balcony. Not recognizing the attack, I did it. A few hours later, I thought about my past conversations with Lion. He had told me my career choice wasn't the best. I hadn't spoken to him for over a year, and I wanted to share my achievements. Knowing I needed to change my job to love him properly and go back to school, I was excited and decided to text him. However, I chickened out. A few hours later, a manipulating spirit said, "He's dead," and I started to panic because my visions and dreams had been coming true. I texted him, "Are you okay? Please just say yes or no." He replied, "Yes," and I felt relieved. Later that evening, I wanted to call him but was afraid. I texted him a word to see if he was gifted. He didn't respond, so I texted him again with a different word. 3 minutes later, he called me. I smiled and was excited to tell him I was done with my job and changing my life. When I answered and he asked why I was texting random words, I quickly said, "I threw my work phone off the balcony. I'm done with it." But he hung up the phone in my ear before I could finish. Heartbroken, I listened to the Lemonade album on full volume and sang along with the song that spoke about going back to God after mistreatment. Shortly after that, I heard a male and woman argue through the music and the wall. It sounded like it was coming from the condo unit above me, but I couldn't tell if it was real or in the spirit, surprised that I could even hear it. As it got louder, I turned up the music with my Bluetooth speaker to block it out. I remember, although I was a little heartbroken, I still felt a high of happiness. So I started to sing and dance in my living room while I looked out the glass window in my condo. When I tell you I was hitting them notes, I was singing from my heart. It was now night, roughly around 6:30 to 7 p.m., and I was done singing and dancing. I started to think about Lion as I watched the sunset through the window. I didn't know how sadness could take over my emotions like that, and I wondered if he was sad about hanging up the phone on me. The sad emotions didn't feel like my own. It crept up out of nowhere, similar to the past when he was heavy on my mind. I looked at the vodka bottle on my counter and decided I should get drunk to numb myself to it. As I went to pour a shot, for some reason, I couldn't drink it. It was as if something didn't want me to drink. I now know this was God. I sat on the stool and pulled the shot glass on the island counter right in front of me. I looked at it again until I noticed something black in the corner of my right eye. I turned my head to the right, facing the front door, and there it was, the Reaper spirit, aka the spirit of suicide. I stared at it, and for some reason I didn't scream or cry because I was in shock. Since I was a child, I had seen things in the corner of my eye, but they would always disappear as soon as I looked. This time it was there, black, smoky, hooded spirit with no face. It was as if it wanted me to see and know it was there. That's why it took about 4 seconds of me staring at it before it disappeared. As it disappeared from my sight, I heard the poof echo from the physical to the spiritual. The poof noise was clear and loud in the physical, and the echoing effect of it got quieter as I heard it in the spirit. My spiritual eyes and ears were more open than ever before. Now, anyone would have panicked and run out of the condo, but for some reason, I lied to myself and said, "That wasn't real. Take the shot." After I took the shot, I felt very sick. I decided not to get drunk and call it a night. The next day, I woke up and decided to lay on my bed for a bit because I felt very sick. I looked at my glass window and saw a big raven fly across super fast. It scared me, so I decided to play music while preparing for my hair appointment. When I stood up to look in the mirror, I noticed a big boil on my face the size of a sunflower seed on the side of my nose. My heart was racing. It was so bad I sat back down, deciding that instead of taking public transit to my hair appointment, I would lay down for a few more hours and take a cab instead. 2 hours later, I tried to get up again. I felt dizzy. I started to hear noises in my room. I decided to try and ignore it, but as I looked in the mirror again, and I noticed that the sunflower boil on the side of my nose was now as big as a dime. I tried to squeeze it, but it was stiff, and nothing came out. Trying to relax, I felt very restless as my body was in pain and my spirit in agony. The voices were getting louder, and then I noticed that my phone was being monitored again. I then heard the same manipulating spirit that said, "Throw your phone off the balcony." Say, "Throw your regular phone in the toilet." As I stood up, I felt very weak and tired. I walked to the bathroom and threw my phone in the toilet. After I did this, I realized that not only was I under attack, but I was also phoneless now. As I walked back to the bed, I felt both very energetic and restless, with a lot of anxiety and, at the same time, very weak. Remember what I said about layered curses. I started to hear multiple negative spirits. What I then realized at the time was I had full access to the spiritual realm, and my eyes and ears were now fully open. I started to fall asleep through the pain and agony until I was woken up by hammering noises. It sounded as if someone was hitting the floor in the unit above me, the same unit I heard the arguing from. As I sat up, I realized that every time I heard that noise, I felt more and more sick, and I also felt more anxious. I reached a point where I almost lost control of my thoughts and body, yet I knew I was under attack and tried to fight back. The anxiety grew unbearable whenever I stood up. I walked to the kitchen to make a smoothie, hoping it would help, but I was in too much agony to drink it. I decided to change the atmosphere's energy by taking a bath with sea salt. As the tub filled, I prayed to God and lit my scented candles. I felt everything calm down in the tub and no longer heard the spirits. I saw images forming in the tile lines and heard a parade of people chanting freedom like the marches of the past. I saw visions of Martin Luther King. When I left the tub to look out the window, there was no parade, just traffic. I realized I was hearing spiritual history. I told myself to observe carefully and distinguish between spiritual and physical events. I knew I was in a spiritual war, receiving real revelations from God mixed with witchcraft attacks. After this revelation, the hammering noises and anxiety returned. I sang gospel music, begging God to save me, but the agony and anxiety were overwhelming. I heard a witch's voice say, "Die, die," and realized this was the same female voice tone I heard arguing through the wall. I felt chills and knew I was uncovering something. Scared, I filled the tub again with water and salt, praying for relief as I got in. This time, I couldn't feel the pain go away, and the hammering noises got louder. I ran out of the tub, grabbed my Bluetooth speaker, ran back to the bathroom and started to play gospel music. As I played the gospel music, I dumped my head under the water to ensure my head and face were covered with water. When I got back up, I started to hear her even while the music played. She said, "Die, die, die." Every time she spoke, I felt the darkness take over my body, and anxiety hit harder and harder. I knew right then and there that she was in the middle of doing witchcraft, and whatever she was hitting was part of her spell. I jumped out of the water and started screaming in pain because I could feel the demonic spirit squeezing my body, and I ran to the room. I put on my pants and I was getting dressed. I kept hearing the soothing voice of the Holy Spirit trying to calm me down while I was in my panic. But her tone and the banging noises got louder and louder, almost like the sound at a butcher shop. Then the music playing in the bathroom stopped, and I ran to the bathroom to see why it stopped, and I noticed it was because the Bluetooth speaker died. Right before I could go find the charger, I started hearing the manipulating spirit come back in. I then heard them say, "You need to jump off the balcony. If you don't jump off the balcony, we will go after your children and Lion." I started to panic more and more. I started sweating all over as I felt the force from the spirit of suicide trying to push me towards the balcony. I fought as it pushed. I then felt the urge to give in and go as my body got tired. But then I immediately dropped to my knees and begged God. I said, "God, please protect my children and Lion, please." I then said, "God, if I have to die today, please let them take me instead. Please let my children and Lion live, and let him take the kids because they don't have anyone who will properly care for them." I begged and begged. As I felt the urge to go to the balcony go away, I used this as an opportunity to get up and run back to my room. I also noticed that the witch in the unit above me would take breaks from the banging, and whenever she would start again, that's when my body would feel the force of the suicidal spirit. As I got in the room, I started to hear the hitting bangs again, except this time I also heard a loud bang. It sounded as if somebody's body hit the ground. I then started to hear, "He died," and Lion died. As I heard this, I screamed, and then I heard, "He jumped the balcony and killed himself," from the manipulative spirit. By this time, I was able to distinguish the difference between their voice and God's voice. When I heard them say this, I started screaming because I thought to myself, either they are going after Lion and my kids next because I didn't jump off the balcony, or he already did it. I started to scream as my body went back into agony, and I dropped to the ground with my face facing the mirrored closet door. I lay there as my body started trembling, the spirit tormenting my body, trying to get me to get up and go to the balcony. However, I felt another force keeping me stuck to the floor. I stared at myself in the mirror as I heard the witch screaming, "Die, die," and then I started to pee myself. I tried to get up as she was saying this, with the urge to jump the balcony. However, every time I felt the urge to go, I felt another force keeping me stuck to the ground, and I was unable to move. As I lay there in my pee, facing the mirrored closet door, I stared into my eyes. I then noticed my pupils were big and were covering the entire iris part of my eye. The more I stared at my pupil, I started to see images form. I stared deeper into them, and I noticed both pupils had moving images in them, like a TV screen.
Sample 2.
I started to stare at the candle flame on my island counter and saw a moving image of Jesus holding my hand and walking with me into the ocean. This was an interpretation of God purifying me while walking me through the fire to safety. After I watched Jesus walking me into the ocean through the flames, I remembered hearing the Holy Spirit say not to open the door, and instantly thought about going to the neighbor next door to call the police. I tiptoed to check if she was gone and saw the red laser and a person all in black. Panicking, I ran out onto my balcony. That is when I decided to jump over two of the balconies on my right into my neighbor's balcony. There were condos facing the condo I lived in, so as I jumped into the neighbor's balcony and then onto the other neighbor's balcony, I saw camera flashes, multiple flashes as people were watching a show and taking pictures. It reminded me of paparazzi cameras. That's when I knew there was something deeper going on that I didn't know but others did. I banged on my neighbor's balcony door, as he looked, saw me, and panicked. The fact I jumped over 2 balconies 6 floors high freaked him out. He asked what happened, and I said, "Please call the police. Someone is trying to kill me." He called the police, spoke to them, and then handed me over the phone. After he spoke to them and gave me the phone, I told myself, "Steph, you can't go into details about the witchcraft. They will think you are crazy. Play it cool and tell them what you saw and heard." I told them that I heard gun clicks at my front door and told them about the laser and the female wearing all black outside my door. I also told them that I think they have a gun because of the gun clicks. As I spoke to them and gave them my information, I heard a knock on the door. I panicked because I thought it was the witch who was at the door. When my neighbor opened the door, I saw 2 police officers. I wondered how they got here so fast. They came in very chill and cool, asking my neighbor and me questions. I told them what happened, and then they said there was a warrant for my arrest, and they needed to take me in. I was so confused because someone was trying to harm me, and I called to protect myself. So why am I being taken in? I instantly looked at the balcony. I turned around, looked at the officer's eyes, and all I heard was the manipulating spirit saying, "Now is your chance to jump." I turned around, and as I ran to the balcony, the officer said, "No, don't go there." He grabbed my arm and then placed cuffs on me. As they both dragged me and brought me to the elevator, I begged and pleaded my case and said I didn't do anything wrong. I mentioned that this woman in the unit above me was trying to kill me, yet they were arresting me. As we got into the elevator, I started to think about police brutality, and I said to them, "Please don't hurt me. Please, I have kids." They both looked at each other and said, "What should we do with her?" while roughing up my body to scare me. As the elevator opened, I decided to try to fight to get away and run until I couldn't, so I surrendered. It all played out like the Ring the Alarm music video. We walked outside the condo, where across the street were 2 parked police cars. They brought me to one where 2 officers sat in the front seats. They both came out of the car, while the one in the driver's seat took me from the other 2 officers and placed me in the back seat. As I sat in the car, I decided to observe their conversations outside the car. They were all joking around and laughing, and I couldn't understand why they were so calm after I mentioned someone had a gun at my front door. That's when I saw them all turning their heads to the left. I looked out the window to see who they were staring at, and there she was, the witch that lived above me. I call her York Condo Witch. She was dressed in black leather pants, a bodysuit type outfit. She had long sleeve with black gloves. You couldn't see much skin, and she had a big black floppy hat to hide her face, similar to the cartoon Cyber 6. Although she showed no skin, I could still recognize her face, that she was indeed one of Lion's exes. She looked at the window where I was sitting and then turned her head forward as she crossed the street. That's when I heard the officer who placed me in the back seat say, "That's her?" Then the other officer in the passenger said, "Yep, that's her." I watched as she walked into the condo confidently. That is when I realized I was right. She lived in the same building, and not only did she, but the officers were also involved, which explained why they were so calm. They continued to talk about where they were taking me for a good 5 minutes. And then the officer in the driver's seat said to me, "You know we can arrest you for false claims." I said to him, "I didn't make any false claims." He kept trying to hint to me while clearing his throat that I needed to play along by saying, "We're letting you off easily, and if you do choose to continue with the false claim, there will be an added charge on the charge already present, which can make things harder for you." At that moment, as I was being blackmailed, I then decided to play along because I was afraid. I said, "Yes, you're right. I am not feeling well mentally. I was having some issues today, and I also drank a lot earlier." He agreed with me and said, "I will let you go today, but it's best I take you in because you have 2 warrants out for your arrest from last year." I was confused about the warrants, but I played along anyway and said, "Okay." I knew it was much safer for me to go to jail than to stay in the condo where she was now that I knew she lived there. This explained why the noises got louder as I was in the condo. However, when I left the condo, I was able to hear her live in the spirit. As we drove off, the heavy metal music blared louder, echoing down the empty street around 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. The officers turned their heads toward the condo, confirming they heard it too, and I felt relieved knowing it was real and that I wasn't crazy. The music came from the balcony directly above my balcony, confirming that York Condo Witch indeed lived right above me.
Sample 3. I hope you guys enjoy.
I walked in and lay on the couch. I tried to sleep through the heavy headache. About 30 minutes later, the back door opened, and I saw my mom storming in with her husband, who also stormed in. They both looked at me and said to me, "Do you know how long she's been looking for you?" I looked at her and she started to cry. She had tears in her eyes and said, "Stephanie, I don't know what I'd do if something happened to you." At this moment, I was very confused because I started to question whether she was really involved because of her tears. Although I saw visions confirming her involvement, her tears looked so believable. I decided to observe her further instead of listening to my visions and discernment because I wanted the tears to be real. I have longed for her to show me some type of love and affection all my life, and this was the first time I was witnessing this. Therefore, it was believable. She left and went upstairs, and about 15 minutes later, the attack started back up. My chest was starting to get tight and closing in on me. My breath got shorter and shorter, and I started to feel the spirit suffocating me. I was fighting for my life at this point and trying to collect as much air as possible. I could barely talk. I ran to the powder bathroom by the living room to look in the mirror and noticed my face was getting pale and looked washed out. My pupils were so dilated, I could no longer see my chestnut brown iris eyes. I slowly walked back to the couch, trying to breathe, and then she came downstairs and walked towards me as I lay on the couch. She looked at me and then walked over to the other couch and sat down. She would then watch me and then look at her phone and started texting. She had a normal look on her face with no concern, nothing but a dumb look. I would hear the WhatsApp sound alerts confirming as she would look down and respond to the messages. She was indeed speaking to someone, but who? The fact that it was on WhatsApp confirmed that it was someone possibly in another country. She got up, came up to me as I lay down, stood above me and stared looking in my eyes. She then said to me, "Your eyes are dark." It was as if she was receiving instructions from someone and reporting back to them. There was a moment when she started to ask me certain questions about the attacks to see what my responses would be, and every time I responded to tell her what I felt and saw, she would text. This is how I received the revelation that she was monitoring me. At that point, I knew it was a new attack because the pain in my chest wasn't the same as the other pain that I felt at the condo. This pain was more like suffocation and a spirit closing in my airway to my lungs. The pain in the condo was tight. However, I was able to breathe still and control my breathing. This was either a new attack from York Condo Witch, or this was possibly a new attack from whoever my mom was communicating with on the phone, or it could be a combination. However, it felt new and more powerful in a controlling sense. The pain I felt was as if I was going to die on that couch. I could not breathe at all. My hand movements became slow, and I tried my best to pretend I was fine so I wouldn't look crazy. But it was now physically evident that I was really sick. Her husband Neville came downstairs and noticed how sick I looked. As soon as he came in, my mother went to cook me something to eat. She came back with fried eggs and bread. My instant thought was, my airway is closing in on me and she's bringing me eggs and dry bread with no water? I could barely talk, and I wondered if she was honestly concerned or if she was involved in trying to kill me. She took the plate from me, went back into the kitchen, and started crying out loud. It was so loud it was as if she wanted us both to hear her cry. She came back out, wiped her face, and sat down in the chair across from me, and again I wasn't sure if it was genuine or fake. When her husband Neville left to go upstairs, she stayed on the chair across from me. Her face was no longer concerned. Also, the WhatsApp alert was now silent because she turned her phone volume down. I knew I, at this point, had to observe her behaviors more because I already saw signs of deception. This was a moment when she would say random things to check my alertness, and she did this with a normal face. At one moment, she said, "There's a basketball player who wants to marry you." Let me just mention that we were not having any conversation about basketball or love because I was silently fighting to breathe as the spirit was squeezing my throat. She would show me a photo of myself on her phone and say, "Look at that photo. I like the black hair photo of you." I was confused about why she had screenshot photos of me saved in her phone. She started to ask me all these random questions and would mention things that were not true in order to see how I would respond to them. The whole time she asked me random questions and brought up random topics that were not real. I knew she was testing me to see how alert I truly was in order to see if the attacks were working. As I observed, I remembered hearing a soft, still voice that was the Holy Spirit at the time, and he said, "Shh, don't say anything." When she asked me more random questions, I stayed silent and focused on my breathing. As the attack got stronger to where it felt like the air was going in my nose and it wasn't properly reaching my lungs, she looked and went back to texting on the phone. She left the room and came back 5 to 10 minutes later and sat right across from me again, except this time she had the phone by her ear. The person she was talking to was whispering on the phone, and by this time, my gift to hear was so powerful I would hear things from far away. I was able to hear the witch she was on the phone with whispering, and as she whispered, my body felt cold and my chest got tighter and tighter. I noticed that while she whispered, my mom wouldn't say much. She was silent as she sat across from me, staring at me. When the person finally stopped whispering, my mother asked if she had eaten yet. The silence was meant to throw me off. I gathered all my observations at this moment, including the fact that whenever my brother or her husband came around, as I was under attack, she would show concern or cry because of my condition. When they were not around, she would have a straight face and act normal towards me, with no remorse, or even make little jokes with a smile on her face. I saw how she went from being concerned while others were around to having a normal, happy face when they left. Observing all of this opened my eyes even more, and I started to remember the revelations I received before the attacks came. For example, around the time she called me in the past, I recall receiving visions of her doing evil spiritual things to me. However, I made excuses because I didn't want to believe it. Although my childhood memories with her were traumatizing and confirmed her capability to be involved, it was still hard to believe she would do such things.